Last question. So we have the length of a rectangle. So we have a rectangle. Let's first draw a rectangle. And I'm just going to call this length, and I'm going to call this width. So I'm going to just label them L and W for length and width, okay? And it's telling me the length of a rectangle is 6 inches less than 4 times the width. So L is equal to, because remember we have is, the length is 6 less. So whatever number I get, I'm going to subtract 6 from it. 6 less than 4 times the width. Okay, so I know L equals 4W minus 6. And it said find the dimensions of the rectangle if the area is 54 inches. So we know area, which equals length times width. So the area is always going to be equal, length times width is going to be equal to length, which is 4W minus 6, times width, which didn't change, it's just W. And it's telling me that the area, which is length times width, is equal to 54 inches squared. Okay, so now again, we have to solve this. So I'm going to first multiply this together, which gives me 4W squared minus 6W equals 54. And now I subtract 54 from both sides, and I get 4W squared minus 6W minus 54 equals 0. So now, when I want to factor this, the first thing I want to do, remember I said the first thing always is the first step is find the greatest common factor. And I can see here that all these numbers are even, so I can factor a 2 out of them. So my greatest common factor here is 2. And what that means is I'm going to make this 2 times 2W squared minus 3W minus 27 equals 0. Okay? And I only need to factor what's in here. I can actually just divide both sides by 2. And this cancels and this stays 0, right? 0 divided by 2 is still 0. So again, I have to do my factoring or my quadratic formula. So my second step is I want to find 2 numbers that multiply together to give me A times C. And A times C is negative 54. And when I add those numbers together, I get B, which is negative 3. And then I'll make my table. M, N, M plus N. All right. So let's see what our factors are for 54. Well, 1 and 54 always. 2 and 27. And you can just use your calculator to do this. I know it's divisible by 3. So it'll be 3 and 19. It's not divisible by 4. How do I know it's not divisible by 4? Well, when I divided it by 2, it was 27. So I can't divide 27 by 2 again because it's odd. So it's not divisible by 4. It's not divisible by 5. It is divisible by 6. 6 and 9 is 54. It's not divisible by 7, 8, and we already have 9. So again, those are all my factors. And you can just go through your calculator. You really only have to go 7 and 8 because I already have 9 here. And I know from there on, I already got everything. Which side am I going to put my negative sign on? Well, I know that my B is -3, which means when I add them, I have to get a negative number. So the bigger number has to be negative. So that means this has to be negative, this has to be negative, this has to be negative, this has to be negative. And that gives me -53. I mean, I know you all can still see the answer already, but I'm just going to go through it anyway. Because there's my -3. Okay. And then I think I'll do the third step over here. So I have to do my factor by grouping, which means I start with 2w squared and minus 27. And then I take my plus 6w minus 9w, and that becomes my -3w. Okay? And then I factor by grouping. So I group the first two together. Again, I always put a plus between them. If you just put a parentheses next to that, it looks like multiplication, and it will probably confuse you at some point. So I always put that plus between. That way I see that I have two separate groups and they're added together. All right, in my first group, I look for my greatest common factor, which we can see is 2w. And when I factor out a 2w, I get w plus 3. And then I have plus. And now again, remember, we're going to factor out that negative. And 27 and 9 are both divisible by 9. So I'm going to say -9. And then I have times w plus 3. And notice if you distribute this, you'll get back to where we started. We have our w plus 3 in both terms. And so I'm factoring that out. And then what's left for the first term is 2w, because notice this gives me 2w times w plus 3, which is here. And then I have plus minus, which is -9. And when I multiply that times -9, I get my second term. And this equals 0. So now I solve it. So this will be step 4. I know that either w plus 3 equals 0 or 2w minus 9 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides, I get w equals -3. Or I add 9 to both sides. I'll do it in 2 steps. And then I divide both sides by 2. So here I get w equals 9/2. Okay, good. So I now have 2 solutions for w. And I go back to my question. Remember, always go back to your question. It says, find the dimensions of the rectangle if the area is 54. So it's not looking for the area. It's already telling me the area. It's looking for the dimensions. I have 2 solutions, w equals -3, w equals 9/2. So w equals -3 or w equals 9/2. But what does w stand for? W stands for the width. Can I have a width of -3 for one side of my rectangle? Of course not. That doesn't mean anything, right? So we're going to cancel that. And we're going to say, now we know w equals 9/2. And I can find my length is 4w minus 6. So my length equals 4w minus 6, which equals 4 times 9/2 minus 6. I can cancel my 4 and 2 and get 2. So now I have 2 times 9 is 18 minus 6 equals 12. So I know my width equals 9/2. My length equals 12. Let's make sure when I multiply them together, I get 54. So my area would equal 9/2 times 12. Again, I can simplify first by saying 9 over 2 is 6. 9 times 6 is 54, so that worked. When it asks for dimensions, it's asking you for the dimensions are 9/2 by 12. And we want to put our units, and our units are in inches. Notice everything here is in inches. We would say 9 inches by 12 inches. That's the size of the rectangle. Or if I wanted to draw it out, this would be 12 inches and this would be 9/2 inches. Thank you very much for listening.